Hello everyone, today I've prepared for you a Blitz game played between the 8th World Champion Mikhail Tal and the 12th World Champion Anatoly Karpov. A real clash of two champions, featuring the sacrifice of two rooks. The game was played in 1987. Enjoy watching. Mikhail Tal begins the game with e4, immediately taking control of the center. Karpov replies with c6, preparing the central counterstrike with d5. Tal continues with c4, and we have the Caro-Kann defense, pan of attack, accelerated version. The idea for white is that after the eventual d5, which indeed happens in the game, the center opens up. After exd5 and cxd5, 4 pawns get exchanged, leaving white with an isolated pawn on the d-file. Yes, it's a weakness, but in return white gets central space and open lines for active piece play. Karpov develops his knight to f6, planning to recapture on d5 with the knight. Why not with the queen? Because if black takes with the queen, white would gain a tempo with nc3. Tal brings his knight to c3, and after the exchanges on d5, he develops his king's knight to f3, allowing black to capture on c3 if they wish. The 12th world champion, well aware of Tal's sharp attacking style, decides to simplify the position a little. He exchanges one pair of knights, nxc3, followed by bxc3. Sure, white strengthens their pawn center and prepares d4, but at least one pair of knights is off the board. Karpov plays g6, preparing to fianchetto his bishop on the long diagonal toward d4. White strikes with d4, seizing the center, opening lines, and preparing to develop the light-squared bishop and castle. Black develops with bg7, and after bd3, black castles kingside, placing the king in safety. For now, safety. White wastes no time and castles as well. Black develops the knight to c6. White has their pawn center firmly established, but black's bishop on g7 is very powerful, always targeting white's pawns. Tal calmly brings his rook to the open file with 1 rupee. Karpov replies re8, already signaling his intention to break with e5, undermining white's pawn structure. Tal, however, develops his last minor piece, bg5, pinning the black pawn on e7 to the queen on d8. Suddenly, e5 is no longer possible. Black must now decide what to do with the bishop on c8. Placing it on the long diagonal with b6 and bb7 would take too much time. Another logical move could have been bg4, pinning the knight on f3, and then, after white's queen moves, black could finally push e5 while the knight remains tied down. But in the actual game, Karpov chooses b6, developing solidly but somewhat passively. The idea behind this maneuver was that black wanted to place his bishop on the long white diagonal, first on e6 and then eventually on d5. But it seems Karpov simply forgot who was sitting across from him, Mikhail Tal. And naturally, in this position, Tal sacrifices the exchange. Rek 6. Black recaptures, and now, without the dark squared bishop, white has the powerful bishop pair and complete control over the light squares. The white bishop comes to c4, already threatening to grab the pawn on e6. Black is forced to defend with qd6, centralizing the queen and guarding the pawn. Tal calmly plays qe2, adding even more pressure on e6. Black retreats the knight awkwardly to d8, just to protect that pawn. But now comes 1 rupee, white doubles rooks, and suddenly the pawn on e6 has nowhere near enough defenders. Marching the king to f7 to protect it is absolutely unattractive. So Karpov instead brings his last inactive piece, ra8, c8, putting the rook on the open c-file, eyeing white's bishop and pawn on c3. And here it's vital for white to remember the strategic point of the exchange sacrifice. Tal didn't give up a rook just to win back the e6 pawn. If white simply captures on e6 and allows trades, black will recapture on c3 and emerge with a material advantage. A knight for a rook, and a winning position. That's not Tal's way. His strategy is clear: attack, attack, and attack the black king. And the best move to support this plan is nd2. The knight is heading to the center, toward e4, reinforcing the bishop on c4 and preparing to strike. Karpov tries to sidestep the pressure with kh8, stepping out of possible x-rays against the e6 pawn. But Tal continues flawlessly, hitting the queen. Black retreats the queen, also threatening the bishop on c4. Tal calmly shifts his bishop back to b3, keeping it alive and aiming at the kingside. Karpov desperately lashes out with e5, trying to break white's central structure. But here white must stay true to the plan, no materialism, no clinging to the pawn on d4. Instead, Tal goes for the throat with h4, launching his pawn storm against the black king. Black greedily captures the d4 pawn. But Tal doesn't care, h5. The pawn marches closer to the black king's cocoon, and now the position starts to collapse for Karpov. He captures on h5, but that only speeds up his downfall. A stronger defensive try would have been qb6, bringing the queen back to the defense. Then, after captures, the queen would guard the kingside. But Karpov takes on h5, and Tal immediately strikes back, qx-h5. Even here, Tal could have played the cold-blooded and brilliant nf6, a move almost impossible to find in Blitz, but devastating if calculated correctly. The whole point is that this knight simply cannot be taken. For example, if black plays bxf6, then white responds bxf6 plus with check. Black is forced to recapture, otherwise it's immediate mate. And after that, white simply takes the unprotected rook on e8. If instead black captures with the pawn, the story is the same. White first grabs the rook on e8, and then immediately delivers mate. Even if black tries to block with the bishop, white captures it, and it's checkmate. So, if black doesn't capture the knight on f6, then what? White is attacking the rook on e8, and if the rook retreats, Tal has prepared another sacrifice, nxf7. Giving up the knight and completely destroying black's kingside defenses. After capturing the knight, white finishes with a stunning combination, qx-h5+, and the only block is with the bishop. But after that, it's mate against the black king. Tal could have ended the game right there. But instead, playing in a very human style, he chooses qx-h5, attacking the rook on e8. Black is forced to retreat with rf8, bringing the rook into the defense of the king. And now comes bc2. The bishop becomes an active attacking piece, and the threats of discovered checks with the knight, especially nf6+, opening lines for the queen and bishop, are everywhere. Black tries to defend with qe5, centralizing the queen and tying down white's pieces. Now the bishop can't move because the queen on h5 is hanging, and the knight can't move because the rook on e1 would fall with check. But Tal, unfazed, calmly plays ing3, sacrificing his second rook. This time, it's a clean rook sacrifice. The point? White distracts the black queen from defending the kingside. And really, black has no choice, the queen must capture on g3 with check. After qxg3+, white's king steps aside, and suddenly black is out of checks. The deadly threat of qxh7 # is on the board. In this position, black had one miraculous defense, the inhuman move bh6. By giving up the bishop, black could still fight. If white captured with the bishop, then rf7. And the rook, defended by the knight on d8, protects the critical 7th rank. The pawn on h7 would remain safe, and the king survives. Similarly, if white captures the bishop with the queen, rf7 again holds. White simply wouldn't have enough firepower, and the attack would fizzle out. But Karpov missed this only chance. Instead, he played the very human move a6, trying to create luft for the king. But now Tal strikes with bx6. If black recaptures, it's made in just a couple of moves, so the king has to run. After kg8, white calmly takes on g7. Black desperately tries to counterattack with rxf2, hitting the bishop on c2. But Tal doesn't care, his mate is faster. qh7+, forcing the king to f7, then qg6+, pushing the king back to g8. Now comes ba6+, and after the only move kh8, white finishes the game with qg7 #. What a breathtaking attack! With this thunderous display, the 8th world champion, Mikhail Tal, defeats the 12th world champion, Anatoly Karpov. If you enjoyed this masterpiece, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more legendary chess battles.